Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing fine and ready to get to work.
That's right.
Save the world.
Do our best.
Or at least pacify ourselves. No, I hope it's a little bit more than that. I think it is good therapy, though.
Yes, for sure.
When you have to talk to the walls. The first time I ran for Congress, I told Carol I was going to run for Congress. She said, "What do you want to do that for?" I said, "I'm tired of talking to the walls. I want to at least have a little audience." Yeah. And I expected a very small audience. But fortunately, we have reached more than a couple people, and we want to keep trying to get the truth out. Right now, we're trying to get the truth out about coronavirus and a few other abuses that's going on. But, you know, we've talked already a lot about Scott Adams, and how we liked his appointment.
Yeah. Atlas, yeah.
Atlas,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
Okay. He's been appointed theoretically to replace Fauci, but Fauci's old and he's going to be there forever.
Yeah.
And he's not going to be removed, but he's been diminished a bit. But because Dr. Adams is doing so well, I think that it's not surprising to see what's happening to him.
Yeah.
He has to be attacked, and it's a systematic attack. It's just not one individual, but they're showing that he is in bad trouble, and all the lefties are after him, and he's not he's not a good doctor, and this sort of thing. So I imagine you weren't too surprised about this to come, and the big question is what kind of effect will this be? You know, the left have a few friends out there. They gang up on you and they can destroy a person. So there's always that great danger, even though with his qualifications that shouldn't happen. But just because something shouldn't happen doesn't mean a thing. So I'm concerned about it, but hopefully they won't have to. They're not able to destroy him completely.
Well, the media is in a concerted effort right now to destroy Atlas and to destroy the whole idea of herd immunity, which you have a better term for it, the natural community immunity. But what they have to do this is to have some revisionist history. Now they have to recast Sweden as an abject disaster, the worst of all countries, and that's what they're doing. And it's unbelievable and astonishing that they're getting away with this because it's so objectively untrue. But let's look at a couple of clips, and this would be a good example of what they're trying to do. This is Dan Horowitz tweeted this. This is a New York Times article. A new coronavirus advisor roils the White House with unorthodox ideas. Horowitz comments, unorthodox, known as virology until March 2020. Right? The idea that there's such a thing as herd immunity. And here's from the article, Dr. Paul, and this is from the New York Times. This is why Atlas is so horrible. He cannot be allowed to remain. Here's what they say. The core of his appeal in the West Wing rests in his libertarian style approach to disease management, in which the government focuses on small populations of at-risk individuals, the elderly, the sick, and the immune compromised, and minimizes restrictions for the rest of the population, akin to the approach used to disastrous effect in Sweden. Untrue. The argument, they continue, most people infected by coronavirus will not get seriously ill, and at some point enough people will have antibodies from COVID-19 to deprive the virus of carriers. Herd immunity. So they're presenting that as if it's a crazy, unorthodox idea. How do you react? You have a lifetime in medicine. How do you react to them saying this?
Yeah, you know, there's a big difference about herd immunity or getting immunity for a lot of people coming in a natural way versus coming from drugs and vaccines. But nevertheless, they use that. Now I see they've attacked him. He's a bad guy because he's a libertarian. You know, several years back, in my experience in the Congress when it was a little calmer, and I think this is true, but not in public. But the word libertarian used to be used more casually in not a negative way. Because I can recall at times that somebody wants to have a friendly conversation with you. on this issue, I'm a libertarian.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good thing.
And I often thought, nobody ever comes out and say, on me. No, even the left, they wouldn't say, Maxine, I think, accidentally said it. On this issue, I'm a socialist.
Yeah.
It wasn't a benefit. But now it looks like the public perceptions has changed and the language has changed. I hope they haven't won the intellectual battle, but I think the sentiments have changed because they come down hard on you because they think that is building the case up against the doctor. So this is something that will play out, but I think it's such a shame that they get a good person in like that. But you have to put some responsibility on the people who pick and choose our our executives and put people in appointed offices. But we're still hopeful that his position will be helpful. But this whole idea, and you got to be ready. The vaccine is coming, and this guy isn't going to help. He's going to make it worse.
But it's amazing that they're acting as if it's so outlandish that you would protect the vulnerable without locking down the rest of the population. And somehow, how have we done it with every single cold and flu outbreak in the history of mankind, right? Hasn't that been the approach?
Yeah, it's impossible, but we were probably going to mention this a little bit later on, but to whom are they listening? It's Fauci. And yes, he has a medical degree, and he's the expert, but the whole thing is his record is so bad.
Yeah.
And it's been where, he's really... he's been sneaky in the sense that he never made a lot of noise or a lot of enemies, even with his failures. But now they're going back. I think it's Dr. Mercola has an article that he gets back. He has all failures. He was trying to get vaccines and other things for other viruses similar to the coronavirus, and the successes are bad. But the one annoying thing is they'll even put roadblocks into using maybe a medication that might help. They had to destroy hydroxy in order to promote the vaccine.
Yeah. Well, let's go through a couple things. First, let's look at the next clip. This is from the Daily Mail. All right, and this is something we've talked about consistently throughout. Coronavirus herd immunity may be closer than thought because flawed antibody surveys that only test blood dramatically underestimate how many people have had the disease, scientists claim. Now, this is the Today Daily Mail. They're not acting as if the concept of herd immunity is some kind of crazy, kooky thing that Dr. Atlas cooked up while he was on LSD or something, right? It's an accepted thing, and now they're saying again that the tests are flawed. The tests aren't showing how many people have had it, and we see this over and over again. But let's go through a couple of things, and you might want to comment on this. This is what the media is saying. First of all, here's the Intelligencer. This is the New York Times Magazine. Here's the first headline, and later on I'll show you how they changed this. Here's how they say it at first. Trump's new coronavirus advisor wants to copy Sweden's approach. That sounds pretty innocuous when you know anything about Sweden. Let's go to the next one, and this is the one that's the sickest. This is Real Clear Politics. Sweden's virus plan proves deadly. Trump's advisor likes it. Now, isn't that sick? He likes people dying. And here's Fiona Harump, or whatever her name is the one who wrote it. And she said, "We lit candles and prayed that Sweden's approach would work. As Europe locked down, Sweden stayed open, but it didn't work. Sweden had 570 deaths per million, which is better than many of the lockdown countries in Europe, and just barely worse than the U.S., and their economy is still there. And despite their suffering, Sweden is nowhere near reaching herd immunity." Well, let's keep going on a couple of slides then, and I'll turn it back because we should address that point. And just do the next one. Go back one. And here's how they changed the headline. They added the word copy disastrous Sweden approach. Same magazine article, they had to put disastrous. So here's the next one. Oh my gosh, Sweden, it's a failure. It's a failure. Oh, here's from CNN. Sweden reports no COVID deaths for a week. This is just a couple of days ago, August 31st. And let's look at the next one. Here's the disaster of Sweden. Bodies in the streets. Look at that, Dr. Paul. Daily deaths. Basically zero. They're trying to sell us that Sweden's approach was an absolute disaster because they want to destroy atlas. And anyone who looks at this and agrees that it's a disaster, I think needs to have their head examined.
And you know, the distortion about definitions, you know, are they watching deaths as an important number? Are they watching cases, infections? No, it's cases that they watch with.
Yeah.
In more and more cases, they test more people. First thing is the tests so far are not proven to be very accurate, and then they can push things either way they want. You know, have more cases, more positive, and I think that people will wake up, but it's so slow because there's a lot of false positives. I wonder if the lines are still tentatively going to be very, very long and beg for the vaccine. You know, that'd be a good realistic test, because when people are going out to the beaches and things, even in China, where the virus was very, very bad, the people's perceptions, they might not be scientific, but it also reveals what they're thinking about. You know, if they thought they were going to die if they went out, they wouldn't be going out and having a good time on the beach, and they must not hear about people. I keep thinking about this on the airlines. You know, the airlines are all going broke. Yeah. And it's all artificial. I wonder if anybody has ever talked about how many cases of coronavirus was spread on an airplane.
Yeah.
You know, there probably were some.
Yeah.
But the whole idea that they had to destroy the airlines for it, well, of course they've destroyed the economy, and that's a mixed bag. The regulations on airlines are just atrocious, and also the economy is such that people can't and don't want to travel, and it builds alternatives. Now people drive their cars and camp out more. So
yeah.
So.
Well, the whole definition of case has changed completely, right? It used to be you present with some symptoms to your doctor, he does a test. Okay, we found out you've got hepatitis, you have a case of hepatitis, you have a case of something else. Now it's just anyone who takes one of these cockamamie tests and it turns up positive, they take it next week, another positive. You know, 9 times, it's 9 cases. It's, you know, they completely turn language on its head.
Let's say we win this argument that, you know, it overstated, the emergency wasn't quite as bad, but we have to be prepared, and they start even more testing. And if you look at the failures with Fauci, you know, because he never got a good medication or a vaccine for these various other infections. So they're going to start more testing, not less, and more vaccines, and instead of really, it's void of common sense. There's not a whole lot of it. So even the unscientific individual who lives out there and lives with all kinds of dangers might have a different attitude. But and I put a little bit of credibility into it. I thought, you know, when there was a first hint that this thing was going to wind down, I noticed that so many people signed up for these cruise trips.
Yeah.
You know, and that was a really, you know, you could figure, oh boy, somebody gets on there. But even that, if there was a cruise and they were out there for a long time and they lost 1,000 people or something, but that isn't what happened. And the people were, I'm ready to go on a cruise again. And people, if they could be reassured, I think they could get back on an airplane. But I'm not ready for the airplane, but for other reasons.
And of course, the New York Times would view these people as horrible libertarians because they want to take control and management of their own risk. But we should move on to talking about politics. This is something that struck us both today, and we thought it was really insane that Governor Cuomo of New York basically threatened President Trump. Here's what he said. He better have an army if he thinks he's going to walk down the streets of New York. New Yorkers don't want to have anything to do with him. And then he said, and then he went on to say, he doesn't have enough bodyguards to walk through New York City. People don't want to have anything to do. Well, if people don't want to have anything to do with you, then you should be safe, right? People leave you alone. But this is insane coming from a governor of the major American city, suggesting that the president doesn't dare go to D.C. Go to New York.
It's just a gross distortion, and it's evilly motivated.
Yeah.
And people, I wonder if in a way this is a backward way of actually admitting that they're not doing so well. So they have to make the worse they look, the more radical it has to sign. That's sort of what came out of these scandalous things, the political scandals with Russiagate.
Yeah.
The more they were proven to be lying about it, the more vicious the arguments became. So I don't know whether that's all bad, but it certainly represents some sickness going on there. And it represents an age where language isn't too important, or it's very important when it's used in a negative sense, and that way. But I don't know if Cuomo can, get through this okay, because it seems like his numbers ought to go down.
Yeah. Well, he's the guy that killed all the old people with COVID, and then he wrote a book saying how great he did with COVID, right? And he doesn't have an ego problem. You know who should write a book about doing it right is the governor of Florida or the governor of South Dakota, who both done a very good job of dealing with it. But we wanted to talk a little bit about the political pressure for the vaccine, because we've noticed some headlines saying, hey, it's coming by November. We're ready, get ready for it. And you're not so keen on that idea of pushing it through, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I think that's dangerous, and I cite my experience with this a little bit, because now it's coming back in as a discussion point, and that is the so-called epidemic of 1976.
Yeah.
And it was, it was announced as when I was involved in a special election, first went to Congress, and Ford was the president, and it was a political thing. Oh, if I look strong on this, will help him in the election. So there was a rapid vote. I mean, back then they even voted for some of these things.
Wow.
So they voted for the money, and everybody was supposed to get a vaccination, but they had essentially no time to test it. Who knew about safe and effective? It wasn't there. They rushed it through, and even if you read this on the history of it, they admit that nobody died from the virus, and a couple people, 50 people ended up with paralysis, Guillain-Barré syndrome, and some died from it. So more people died from the vaccine, nobody died from the virus, and that's what I think of when I see this, rush it through. And this is political, and of course it's political both ways, because whoever thinks they can get an advantage of this and that they're doing something, I'm all for it. But if it looks like they don't want it to happen, then they're going to put a roadblock in it. But and sometimes the money issue is involved, because maybe the wrong company is going to make this.
Yeah.
They were saying one country, they have the viruses or the vaccine is ready to go, but they were not intending to help use it, because Fauci says no, that's not the right one.
He's not getting any money on that one.
It's a mess. This is a consequence of us depending on government to sort all these problems out. I think the more complicated they are, the more that we should resist the temptation for the bureaucrats to make the decisions. Boy, this is a bureaucratic monstrous, what I think has happened here in the last 6 months, in a short period of time. It just blended into the other events going on, Black Lives Matter, and also the bubble bursting. And we have a mess on our hands, and I don't see this resolving itself very soon, but I do think that points when we make them where there's some hope that people are waking up, that people can turn this off. If they just say, look, if they realize that there has never been a law written by a Congress or state legislature and signed by a governor, I mean, these are local rules, these are mayors, this is not legitimate. And of course, the information is building about it not even being helpful to do this. I mean, this whole idea about masks, I don't think they're helpful at all. And yet, masks used in a medical sense under certain conditions, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Well, there's also the issue of the race against time with the vaccine, because the virus is dying out. I mean, the death numbers are cratering, even the case numbers are cratering, and so they have to race against time, but like they did with SARS, and they failed because the disease died out before then. But you had some comments you wanted to make on a WHO study about some alternatives to super expensive drugs and to a vaccine.
Right. They've come up with a study, and who was involved with that. and they decided that steroids may be helpful. This is interesting medically because, in basic physiology and medicine, we were told you be very, very careful. You don't use steroids with infections, because basically the steroids aren't, it's not an antibiotic. It enhances the infections. And generally rule is still a pretty good rule. But I think when there's things very chronic and it shifts from infection to irritation, that steroids, I could understand where that is good. When the whole cardiac and pulmonary system collapses, they use high doses of steroids. And I can remember one time I had a patient that had been coughing for a long time, and she'd seen a couple of doctors, and I couldn't get her to quit coughing, and the antibiotics weren't working, but we never could culture anything. So I thought, it might be just the irritation of coughing. So in my mind, I thought, well, maybe the steroids, because you use steroids to calm down inflammation, certain things, and lo and behold, she quit coughing in 2 days.
Wow.
But I was glad to see this, but it's something that has to be done with caution. But there's going to be some people that might not be too happy with this. But the people who do respirators aren't going to be too happy. That's when the trouble came. Instead of using the respirators, they should have been giving them high doses of steroids, and they'd have probably done much better.
But with the ventilators, they got $30,000 for each patient, so there's a lot of financial incentive to put people. And I think the death rate was like 90% when they put them on the ventilators or something.
Yeah.
Even higher than that, it was terrible. But we want to talk a little bit about propaganda and nastiness, and it's being used against people who are rejecting the tyranny. And you've got something that you noticed about this new study, supposed new study.
Yeah, they are saying that if you don't play the rules, and sometimes you bend them a little bit, and you know what you have a right to do, and we all do, and sometimes we I don't know if we'd ever do it as much as Pelosi. I don't know whether we'd sneak into the barbershop and have a haircut. Not like that. It's something very, very dangerous. But the conclusion is that we have to make sure the people who do bend in rules or follow the rules and follow the law and follows common sense, we have to destroy them. So they've concluded that if you do that, if you are one of these anti-mask people and you would dare to walk into a place where some people wear and some people don't, the law is inconclusive and you don't think you need it, you're going to be labeled. They're going to destroy you by calling you a sociopath. That you reject all social mores and that you don't care about other people. You're going to infect everybody and people. And I think this is so typical of their reaction and so sick. It's not very scientific. And of course, when bureaucrats run medicine, it's not very scientific. That's why I argue government should be out of the practice of medicine. Yeah. And look at what it's done to, the CDC and WHO. They can't practice medicine, but they really are. They pick and choose drugs, and we've known big pharma is very, very powerful. Sometimes they delay a drug, sometimes they move a drug along, and that's what they're doing now. They're delaying and putting interference in hydroxy. At the same time, they're pushing new drugs, and boy, we need this vaccine. But they're getting a little bit annoyed because of that. They're running out of time, like you said.
Running out of time. Labeling people who don't want to put a mask on their face as sociopaths, it has an effect. First of all, it divides people, and it incites people to violence. If you see someone there and he's more likely to be a sociopath, that person may actually want to kill you. So it really has the effect of inciting violence, and it's really inappropriate. I'm going to wind it down here unless you want to. Before I do my final thing, I want to just talk about homeschooling again really quick. If we can put up this next clip. I saw this week, Dr. Paul. Gallup poll: homeschool rate doubles as school satisfaction plummets. And that is a really good news. People just can't stand having their kids treated like some kind of monsters in their school. And so that reminds me to remind you all, if you are looking for something to do with your children, you don't want to send them to this concentration camps that double as schools. Let's look at that next clip. There is an option, and Tom Woods is offering some discounts for ronpaulhomeschool.com, self-paced. Your kids are going to enjoy it. We're now all sitting around listening to Tom Woods and Gary North teach us about history and Western civilization, Dr. Paul, I can say, and we're actually really enjoying it, and my daughter's enjoying it, and she hasn't liked history before. So give this a try if you're interested in a good solution. You may want to use it for the whole thing. You may only want to get a couple of classes. That's the beauty of it. It's not one size fits all. So ronpaulhomeschool.com. I want to close with some Texas numbers here. And this is day of death numbers for Texas in COVID-19, this next clip. Now look at this. Dr. Paul, that's pretty dramatic. The orange line is hospitalizations. The blue line is deaths on day of death. And as you can see in Texas, even though the governor won't let you go to a bar and have a drink, even though he says you got to put on a face mask, even if you're outside, even though, if you look at the numbers don't lie. These are day of death. So this is so dramatic. So this is from the state health service. But so when the numbers are so dramatic, showing that it really is dying out in Texas, what do? You fake the numbers. You launder the numbers. So let's look at the next slide. Here are the numbers they released yesterday. And it's a small chart. I'm sorry about that. But it's 189 deaths reported on 9/2. But when you look at the chart, the day that the deaths occurred, there were 47 dates revised. 53 of the deaths were more than 3 weeks old. 32 more than 4 weeks old. 10 of them more than 6 weeks old. So the idea that even with a 17.5% drop represented by these 189, a vast majority of the numbers they reported of deaths of yesterday, totally fake. These people died back in June and May. You simply can't do this, and it artificially keeps things closed. The governor, unfortunately, is listening to some very, very bad doctors. I think one of them's out of Baylor, he makes Fauci look like Atlas, and he's listening to some bad people. He promises that he might consider letting us do a couple more things starting next week. We'll believe that when we see it. But when you look at the real numbers of day-on-day deaths, and you look at the real numbers of cases on a day-to-day basis, there's absolutely no justification for treating Texans the way he's done.
Right, and the whole thing going on right now is I think the Biden campaign's on the defensive because I think your charts, you've been putting those charts up for a good many days now, and they're around, and more people know it and believe it, and that's the way the people in the street react. They'll actually even go to the beach and mingle, and which I think is so silly. On the beach, they still can't shake hands. That just is the craziest thing I ever heard. But anyway, they have to fight back, and since Biden decided to campaign a little bit, and he thinks he's losing some of this argument, I have a headline here that caught my attention. It says 81 scientists back Biden after he commits to shuttering the economy if advised by scientists. So if he's advised by scientists, well, science is something, I know a little bit about science. If scientists say you should do it. But then you have to think, who are these scientists? That's the big question. And have they been bought? Are they real scientists? Well, he has some credibility. Here it is, 81 of them with credentials and all this. So therefore, they have to, do exactly, if the scientists say so, we have to lock down again. They're preparing us for this. So I think he has 81 scientists, and I got to thinking, what if I went around and did some other statistic? I was thinking that it wouldn't be too hard. I'd like to find 2,000 politicians to disagree. I'd like to find 2,000 reporters to disagree. I'd like to find 2,000 professors to disagree. And I'd like to find 2,000 people involved in pharma to disagree with this, and say, yeah, someplace you can find people. But this whole thing is a hoax for credibility, and it's not going to solve the problem. But I think truth solves the problem, and I think that's what we're going to continue to work on, getting the truth out and a better understanding. that governments can't solve these problems because almost every problem we're facing today has been created by the government, whether it has to do with lockdown and medical care and finances and debt, undermining our civil liberties, airlines closing down and kids not going to school. I would put an awful lot of blame right on the government, and guess what? There's a lot of people in government, and it's very bipartisan, unfortunately. And that's why I think we do need an independent approach to this and more courage given to the individuals who know this is true, but a little bit concerned. Like, it's pretty natural to be a little bit concerned because the first thing they do with Atlas is they try to destroy him. So this is a risky business if you stand up to him. But eventually there are going to be more and more people stand up to this nonsense and say enough is enough. There's no law that says I have to wear a mask on the beach. And the sooner we wake up the people, the better it will be. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.